Hey guys, how's it going? Value Venture Investing here today. So today we're talking about Virgin Galactic, and the stock is tanking. As of recording this video, it's down over 17%. So today we're going to be talking about why, in my opinion, this stock is down. Now, they just released their Q4 2022 earnings as well as their full year 2022 earnings. So I laid them out here for you guys, Q1, 2, 3, 4, the full year. We're also going to go into their financials and show you the year-over-year comparison, as well as we're going to go through the presentation. There's actually quite a few interesting things in there and quite a bit of information. And then I'm also going to tell you about some things I picked up from the conference call as well. Some good information there as well. So I spent all the time to do this for you guys today, so you don't have to do it. So let's talk about the top line numbers here. Revenue was $869,000. So these are in thousands. Keep that in mind. We have seen this steadily increase since Q1. But of course, they're not really making any revenue. We're going to get into a little bit later in the video where they actually generated that revenue from, but that is the revenue that they had. Net income was $147.7 million. So that was even a little bit more than last quarter. Of course, those have progressively been getting worse. There's a reason for that. You know, they're ramping up, trying to get to space, trying to develop their fleet, stuff like that. But that's definitely something that spooked, I'm sure, investors as well. Cash has also dropped a little bit. They're still strong, about $979 million. I think they say a little bit more. I think they said like 980, but it's about 375,000. And you see it was about 1.1 million a year ago. So overall, I mean, those earnings themselves weren't so bad. We get into the actual earning presentation here now. Of course, Virgin Galactic always has these kind of very nice looking presentations, and you can follow along during their conference calls. They talk about the agenda here. So they did a 2022 overview. They go into the commercial readiness efforts. Then they talk a little bit about the future fleet development, and then they talk a little bit about financials. So the 2022 overview, they didn't give a lot of information here. They talked about this, of course, last quarter. The big news here was that the mothership Eve actually flew back to New Mexico after all the different improvements that they did. They talked about the launch pylon that they did. They said that this is something that actually not only stabilizes the craft, the spacecraft that is, but it also sends information back and forth to the computers. They also put horizontal stabilizers. They also talked about breaking ground on their final assembly factory in Phoenix, Arizona. So that's something that they're working on. They're working on the concepts of it, and they actually broke ground. So that's something to keep in mind going forward. And then they also completed a conceptual design and acquired a site in Sierra Country, New Mexico. So they're expecting this in 2026. And this is going to be a site for the astronauts campus. So I guess they're going to train their future astronauts there, educate them, that kind of thing, right? So that's something to watch as well. I hadn't heard about that before. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. Now then, they talked about their 2023 focus. They first talked about their spaceline missions and safety. I guess that's the meat and gravy of their business. Then they talk about the spaceline technical operations and their customer operations. So of course, these are the three kind of segments that they focus on, but then they talked about what is going to happen. So we're still on track for that Q2 2023 commercial service. However, they said that there would be a glide flight first. Then they would take a flight to space with a Virgin Galactic crew to actually validate the experience. Following this, they expect to commence commercial service in Q2 2023. And this is going to be with a research flight with the Italian Air Force. So they've been talking about this for quite some time. So even now on that one, it's not going to be necessarily commercial as in terms of future astronauts. They're going to start with that. Then they said they're going to follow with the private astronaut flights, and then they're going to also do more research flights. So why is this probably maybe negatively impacting the stock? Well, originally, if you recall back in some of my earlier videos, this was originally Q1 2023. Now they push it to Q2 2023. Of course, good thing they didn't push it again. However, yeah, the first one it's a little ways away still, and if they miss that, I tell you, and it's going to be a research flight as well, so it's not going to generate as much revenue, that's for sure. Then they talked about their future fleet. Of course, we talked time and time again about their Delta class spaceships and their next generation motherships. So they're saying that these future developments, they run concurrent with their current operations, of course, right? So this is something that's kind of a little bit on the back burner. They expect the Delta to enter commercial service in 2026. So for this year, 2023, it's going to be for completing the designs of these new spacecrafts. And then next year, 2024, the assembly phase for both of these is going to begin. And then the ground and flight testing in 2025. So these are something a little far out. And we'll get into this a little bit more into the video here, but they've kind of put this a little bit on the back burner, which they should, because they still have the previous generation that were trying to get people into space. Then they went into their 2022 results. So here it was nice. They went to the fourth quarter 2022 and also the full year. So we're going to talk about the left here first, the fourth quarter of 2022. Of course, revenue was $869,000, and this is compared to $141,000, a year ago quarter. So that sounds good. They said this was driven primarily by future astronaut revenue and events fees. So nothing really too significant there, but for them, quite a bit of revenue. Operating expenses were $154 million, and they attributed this to an increase, of course, in R&D, and this was compared to $81 million the prior year period. Also, something to keep in mind is their R&D, as they get to certain different levels in the process, is eventually going to be a capital expenditure, they're saying. So right now, you're going to see a lot of operating expenses. Of course, this is something to be seen. Net loss of $151 million compared to $81 million prior year. They talk about their EBITDA. It was negative $133 million compared to $65 million prior year. And of course, a lot of people are saying that they didn't raise any money. Well, they did. They raised $3.8 million in gross proceeds through the issuance of 700,000 shares of common stock. And this is something they talked about before, part of their at-the-market offering. So yeah, there was some more equity that was raised to help with their operations. In terms of the full year, we're looking at a revenue of $2.3 million compared to $3.3 million a year ago. So that could be something that be hurting the stock a little bit as well. Again, they said this is from future astronaut event fees. And then, of course, their research missions that they do that they actually generate revenue from as well. Operating expenses were $502 million compared to $323 million a year ago. Again, they said this is from R&D, fleet development, and an increase in selling general and administrative expenses, which you can expect when the company grows. I think they were talking on the conference call that they're kind of at the headcount that they think that they're going to need now. They've done a lot of hiring to support their future aspirations, so that's why we saw the SG&A go up quite a bit. Net loss for the year was $500 million compared to $353 million a year ago. Adjusted EBITDA of negative $431 million compared to $245 million a year ago. For the year, they raised $103.3 million in proceeds through the issuance of shares. So that was the dilution there. And that was for the year. Of course, we talked about just what they did in the last quarter. So this was kind of an interesting slide. So they talked about the cash flow and the balance sheet, and they gave not only their free cash flow and a little bit of guidance, but they also gave some more information as well. The free cash flow for Q4 was negative $135 million, and the guidance for Q1 2023 is about $135 to $145 million. So where we're at, or a little bit more. Here they give their $980 million in cash versus the December 31st quarter a year ago. So it's a little bit more information they gave here. They raised $3.8 million by issuing shares in Q4. We talked about that. And then they also gave insight into how many shares are actually outstanding. You can look in their financials to find this, but they said that at the end of 2022, they had 275 million shares outstanding, and it's about 258 million at the end of 2021. So that's the dilution we're talking about. So I at least like to see them bring that up and talk about it. This is interesting as well. Going forward, that they expect each flight to recognize revenue equivalent of about $600K. So I didn't quite understand why they didn't elaborate a little bit more on that, because they're supposed to be generating a lot more than that. But what they did say was to keep in mind that the first 6 flights will include one of their astronaut trainers. And this is one less revenue you see. So that's huge. That's something that you might not have seen if you looked at the financials or you didn't listen to the conference call, right? And wondering why the stock's tanking so much. So first 6 flights, we still don't have one, right? That they're going to be having less revenue. But of course, after that, they'll have their 4 seats and the revenue will increase. So that's a lot of flights. If they can get those flights out, that's, so this is another kind of hurdle to go over, right? So 2023 focus, of course, they keep saying the same thing, recurring flights to the mothership Eve and Unity, and to continue to progress development of the future fleet and scale the business. So really no new information. And I think perhaps maybe investors didn't like that. Now we'll take a quick look at their financials. Here, they gave their 3 months ended, so for the quarter for 2021, 2022, and then they also did the year ended. I like the way they did this. So, for example, for revenue, as we said, it was $869,000. Last Q4 2021, it was $141,000, and we look for the year, it was $2.3 million versus $3.2 million for 2021. Operating expenses, I've talked about this before, and I'd really love you guys to mention this if you know exactly what this is. Customer experience. I'm assuming this is just everything to do with creating that customer experience, maybe even, the new land that they're working on, acquiring that land, I don't know. So customer service is skyrocketed, 1.1 million versus $2,000 in 2021. This must just be something I'm missing, so I'd like to know what that was. And of course, on the year-over-year basis, we're like $1.9 million versus $272,000. Again, selling general and administrative expenses were up quite significantly from last quarter, 47 million versus 38 million. And year over year, 175 versus 166, they've increased, but not too much. Research and development was $102 million this quarter, and that's a huge increase, of course, from the $40 million on Q4 2021. So on a year-over-year basis for the year, they spent $314 million in 2022 versus $144 million in 2021. So that's where we had an operating loss of $153 million versus just 81 a year ago quarter. And for the year, we had almost $500 million in operating loss versus $319 million. So we go down to the bottom here, the total comprehensive loss was $147 million. Of course, it's about $150 million, but there were some other items for, foreign currency transaction or translation adjustments, stuff like that. So, but I like to go to the total comprehensive loss. Compared to last quarter, that's a pretty big jump. Year over year, again, 505 million versus 354 million, again, pretty big. So we get the net loss per share, basic and diluted of this quarter, 55 cents a loss. And I believe that was kind of in line with what analysts were estimating versus 31 cents loss last quarter. In terms of the balance sheet here, we have 2022, the Q4 2022 and Q4 2021. Assets, we had cash equivalents, restricted cash, marketable securities short, and marketable securities long. So for this quarter, like I said, it was about $979 million that they have. And the December 31st quarter a year ago was about 930 million. So up slightly from that. Total assets, 1.139 million versus 1.068 million. So that was good that increased. Total liabilities, of course, went up significantly, but they're definitely undershadowed by the total assets. So that's good as well. In terms of the statement of cash flows here, they did the 3 months ended for 2021 and 2022, and then the year ended as well. I've talked about this before, stock-based compensation. I like that this has actually dropped. It was 11 million, still maybe a bit high versus in 2021 quarter of 13 million. And on a year-over-year basis, it's dropped quite significantly as well, from 61 million to 45 million. Customer deposits, this is something that they actually talked about. We're going to talk a little bit more in the conference call. This quarter actually dropped by about $1.3 million, so they did address that. So listen for some more information on why maybe this customer deposits actually dropped. But still on a year-over-year basis, they're up quite significantly. Also, what I found interesting was the purchases of marketable securities. If you look at it on terms of a year-over-year basis, 2022 versus 2021, 704 million versus 382 million. This year they did quite significantly more than last year in terms of their investments as well. The proceeds from the issuance of common stocks, again, there's a 3.753. That's the exact number they said, I think about 3.8 million, but that's it right there. And you can see that at least year-over-year basis, they've stopped issuing so much, only 103 million versus 500 million a year ago. Now we're going to get on to the conference call and some information that I got there as well. They talk about cadence. They use that word quite a bit. Regularity of flights is what they talked about. So one of the analyst questions was, after we start doing these commercial flights, how regular are they going to be? Are they going to be monthly kind of thing? So the comment that was made by the CEO was after they get a few in, then they can expect that to be. So maybe take that as a negative a bit because they need to kind of get going with it for it to be regular. How regular is it going to be? Maybe that's something that's affecting the stock as well. VSS Imagine, of course, that's the next. That's not the one we have right now. That's the next one. But they're going to be focusing on the current operations, and they're going to be leaving that future Delta craft idle for now, which is a good thing. let's focus on the spacecraft that we have right now and getting people actually up into space. So that was a question as well. They also asked, one of the analysts asked about future dilution of shares. So they didn't leave this all on the table. They said they're going to do it when it's appropriate, depending on the volume, the share price, different things like that. So you can expect more dilution going forward, negative to the stock. Come on, I guess we pretty much knew that as well. This one might be one that's another reason that the stock is kind of getting hammered a little bit today. It's a little bit confusing, but there was a question about how the customers' deposits drop. Now, when you looked at the statement of cash flows there, we saw that they dropped about by 1.3 million. It was like $103 million in deposits down to like 102. So that was as at December 31st, 2022, right? So they kind of said, can you shed some light on it? The response was, we still have approximately 800 future astronauts. Some actually dropped off in 2022. However, it wasn't one of their biggest years. So other years, some have dropped off. I know if you watch some of my other videos, I think I addressed that in the past. But they did say that was basically from friends and family, maybe word of mouth, backfilled back up. Essentially, those seats were taken again. But that's not reflected in the financials. So I'm thinking maybe that came after the end of the quarter, but there was no other questions asked about that. So that could be a little bit of a concern going forward. People are getting a little fed up, maybe dropping out. But then again, they still say that they're staying around that number. So I really think that Q2 2023 is going to be a make it or break it kind of thing. If they don't do exactly what they say they're going to do, I think this stock is essentially going nowhere. We've all been waiting for a very long time. This quarter wasn't particularly bad, but they didn't give any specific dates on exactly when they're going to do it either, right? It's still kind of vague, no new information. So I'm keeping my shares for now, but I mean, it's kind of a make it or break it for Virgin Galactic as far as I'm concerned at this point. But I would love to know what you guys think. Do you think that they're going to make it? They're going to push it back? What's going to happen going forward? I would love to know your guys' thoughts. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, it really helps. And I'll see you guys in the next one.